Hello everyone. Hey guys, welcome to Ask IITians. So I am Manish Nihalani, your mathematics mentor. Today we would be talking about statistics. This is lecture number 2 of statistics. The last class you all must have seen that how is this data thing related to us in everyday life, and why is this so much important, right? And also I told you all that this chapter is very important from examination point of view because it consists of 8 marks, right? It consists of 8 marks in your examination. So today we would be continuing that chapter. In the last class we had just talked about how is data related to us and how is it being classified into, that is group data, ungrouped data, primary data and secondary data, and we also talked about arrayed data. Okay, so now let's quickly move forward and we'll be able to see that these are the topics which we are planning to cover today. Okay, frequency, what is frequency, mean of discrete and grouped frequency distribution, and different methods of finding mean, right? So if you all can see this chart here that says percentage of people using social media on a daily basis. So it says this is YouTube. So 45% people are using YouTube, 46 are using some about Twitter, then 60% using Instagram. अच्छा ये वाला कौन सा है, which is this is I don't know which sample is this. Then yeah, obviously this is Facebook, 74%. I feel this is Snapdeal or something. So yeah, basically yeah, frequency kya hai, we need to understand what is frequency, what is these are the three topics, as I said, we will be covering. And let's start with frequency. So we know that the number of times an observation occurs in the data is called frequency of the observation, right? For example, if you are collecting data, collecting marks of 100 students in your class, if you are collecting data or that is marks of 100 students in your class, right? So in that case, you would say that the marks can be repetitive also. That is, let's say you are considering marks out of 50. So in that case there are many possible cases that a particular student or more than one student scores maybe 35 marks, right? एक स्टूडेंट से ज्यादा भी 35 marks कवर कर सकते हैं, स्कोर कर सकते हैं, right? This is what so you would say, if let's say 5 students are scoring 35 marks, then 5 is the frequency. In that case 5 is the frequency. So the number of students or the number of times, here the number of times an observation occurs, so 35 in that case is occurring 5 times. So 5 is the frequency, right? 5 is the frequency, it's like that, frequency of observation. And the tabular arrangement of the data showing the frequency of each observation is called a frequency distribution, right? The tabular arrangement of the data showing frequency of each observation is called a frequency distribution, which means if you are arranging this frequency in a tabular format. Let's say now we just considered about 35, but there could be more number of students who must have scored, let's say 40 marks. So let's say there are 10 students, so 40 represents 10 students, 35 represents 5 students, and so on. So if you now formulate this in a table, we would be able to say that this is the frequency distribution. This is the frequency distribution, right? It is as simple as that. So let's now have a brief understanding about what are the different types of frequency distributions. But I hope you all understood that just writing the frequency in a tabular format is called as frequency distribution. Like 30 marks must have been scored by, let's say, 15 students, and maybe 25 marks have been scored by 10 more students, and so on. So in that case you would say this is the frequency distribution of test scores of x students. Now we have different two classifications of frequency distribution, that is discrete frequency distribution and grouped frequency distribution. ठीक है। अब ये सर डिस्क्रीट क्या है, ग्रुप्ड क्या है? सो डिस्क्रीट मींस वी हैड डिस्कस्ड इन द लास्ट क्लास दैट ईच ऑब्जर्वेशन को हम अगर अलग अलग लिख रहे हैं, so if you are considering each observation separately, then in that case you talk about uh, discrete distribution. Whereas when you are grouping the entries in a particular range, then in that case you would say it is a grouped distribution. That is, for example, here if you were saying marks, so marks of 100 students, you could say that between 30 marks and 35 marks, let's say there were 15 students between 30 and 35. So you have basically grouped those 15 students into this class of 30 to 35. Whereas here you were trying to individualize every student and individualize the entry of marks of each and every student. So this was a format of discrete wherein you are individualizing the entry. Discrete means like individualizing the entry, हर एक की entry अलग अलग से. Whereas in a grouped format you are making a cluster, you are making a cluster of uh, a bunch of people or a bunch of entries together, right? So this is what there are two different types of frequency distributions, that is discrete and grouped. Okay, so now the question comes, how do you calculate mean of this? Now first of all we need to understand what is mean, right? What is mean? So we know, like we have been doing this like in our lower grades, that is in grade 9 also, that is whenever we say is mean, it also signifies the average, right? Mean signifies the average. So here we have, acha, first of all we can analyze this, that this data, is this data a discrete data or a grouped data? सिंपल बात है, मतलब डिस्क्रीट है या ग्रुप्ड है. सो यू कैन क्लियरली सी कि हमने इसको कहीं पर भी ग्रुप करके नहीं लिखा. वी आर नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट कि 5 to 10 में देयर आर दीज मेनी ऑब्जर्वेशंस, 10 to 15 में देयर आर दीज मेनी ऑब्जर्वेशंस. सो दिस इज डेफिनेटली नॉट a group data, this is just a discrete data, right? This is just a discrete data. So for discrete data, the average or the mean, the average or the mean is just sum of all observations, sum of all entries upon divided by number of observations, right? So here we would say sum of all the observations is 5 plus 10 plus 15 plus 17 plus 22. How many observations are we talking about? We would say 5, right? So when we take the sum, we get 15 plus 15, 30, right? And 30 plus 17 is 47, right? And 47 plus 22 gives us 69. So 69 divided by 5, so you would say this is approximately 13.8, right? This is just 13.8, right? So mean of this given observations, given set of observations is 13.8. So it's very simple to calculate mean of discrete data so far. कि discrete data में तो कुछ problem नहीं है, sum करो और divide कर दो number of observations से, ठीक है? So now let's move to different methods of finding mean now, but these are for which data? We would now be talking more about grouped data, right? We would be having grouped data now. So these are three different methods to find mean of group data. So the very first method is direct method. The very first method is direct. Then we have assumed mean method, wherein we will be assuming some mean and calculating the exact mean. ठीक है? Then the third one is step deviation method. ठीक है? क्या है ये? All of these we will be coming up to it. So let's start with the very first. It says if x1, x2 and till xn are observations, which means you have n observations. हर एक observation को हमने नाम दे दिया. Let's say it is x1, then the second one is x2, the third one is x3, and so on. Then we also have f1, f2 and fn, right? We have f1, f2 and fn, which means the first x1 observation is occurring f1 times. मतलब अगर हम x1 को नाम दे देते हैं 5x, let's say 5 is your x1, 10 is your x2 and 11 is your x3. So this is x1, x2 and x3. Then you are giving them frequencies also. That is, this 5 occurs maybe 4 times. This 10 occurs 3 times. 11 occurs 7 times. So this is, you will say, F1, F2 and F3, which means the 5 observation is occurring 4 times. The 10 observation is occurring 3 times. The 11 observation is occurring 7 times, right? And so on. So if there are n such observations, ये observations repeat जितने times हो रही है ना, number of times each observation is repeating is the frequency, as we have discussed this already. It's as simple as that, nothing else. So we would say the total number of observations कितने होंगे फिर तो, जितनी total frequency होगी, because total number of observations would be f1 plus f2 plus f3, because that will give us the number of observations totally repeating. So उनका sum कर देंगे तो we would get total number of observations, right? Then we have mean. So here we would say mean will be again sum of all observations upon total number of observations. So total number of observations तो clear है, frequency का sum कर देंगे तो total observations मिलेगा, because each data is repeating these many number of times. ठीक है, इनका अगर sum कर देंगे, so we would be getting the total number of observations, right? Now if we have to calculate mean, which means we have to calculate sum of all the observations. So जब हमें sum करना होगा, so what we would say, 5 plus 10 plus 11 directly? No. So we would say 5 is occurring 4 times, na? So you need to multiply 5 by 4, because 5 4 बार आ रहा है. So 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 4 times. But instead of adding it 4 times, we can directly multiply 5 by 4, right? Similarly, we will multiply 10 by thrice 3, 11 by 7 times, right? And then you will add all of it, so you would get the sum of all the observations, right? Sum of all the observations. And when you have to talk about the total number of observations, you would say it is just 4 plus 3 plus 7. So this is how we calculate mean. So to formulate it in a brief, we would say mean is nothing but summation of fi into xi, frequency into the observation, then you add all those, where your I is from 1 to n, which means if there are n observation, you will have to do this for all of them and add all them, divided by summation of fi. What do you mean by summation of fi? Which means the total number of observations, right? Summation of fi is the total number of observations. Okay, this is the direct mean method. Now it says calculate the arithmetic mean using direct mean method for the following data, right? Shows distance covered by 50 persons to perform their work inside a factory, right? So distance here is 1 to 11 kilometers. There are 4 persons, right? They are covering the distance to perform their work inside a factory. Then 11 to 21 kilometers 6 persons are covering the distance. What do we have to calculate? We have to calculate mean. So we would say mean is summation fi xi into upon summation fi. So here these are basically our fi's, right? These number of persons are our frequencies, fi's. Now we need to understand what is our xi. So for xi, we would say there is a standard procedure. Xi is nothing but the midpoint. Xi is the midpoint of the class interval. Midpoint of class intervals. So here, for example, it is just equal to the lower limit of the class interval, which is 1 for the first class, plus upper limit of the class interval, right, whole divided by 2. So 1 plus 11 by 2, which is 12 by 2, which is just 6. Similarly, दूसरे का class interval, second column का class interval would be 11 plus 21 divided by 2, right? 11 plus 21 is just 32, divided by 2 is 16. So for every class there would be a class mark. We call this xi as class mark, right? And once we have the class mark, we will multiply it by fi, that is the frequency, and add all of them. right? So and all obviously the total frequency is also given in the question, because the total has to be 50. There are 50 persons, so your n is again 50, or your summation fi is 50. Summation fi, the denominator of the mean formula is 50, because there should be total 50 persons, right? So yeah, this is the way you will calculate, that is fi into xi. So as I said, you'd first need to calculate the xi, taking the midpoint of these class intervals, right? And then you need to multiply this with fi, then you need to multiply this with fi, right? So you get the multiplication as 1640, 1640. Okay, and then you divide, you get the mean of the distance is 52.8 kilometers, sorry, 32.8 kilometers is the mean distance, because distance was in kilometers, right? So this is how we calculate using direct method. So direct method is very simple, कुछ इसमें problem ही नहीं है, because you just calculate the xi, you just calculate the midpoint, multiply it with the frequency, divide by the total number of observations. It's as simple as that. Summation fi xi upon summation fi, ये formula हमें याद होनी चाहिए. Summation fi xi upon summation fi. This is how we calculate mean for grouped data using direct method. ये grouped data के लिए पढ़ रहे हैं. Ungrouped के लिए we have already discussed sum of all observations upon number of observations. Clear है? Let's move ahead. Very good. Yes, 32.8 kilometers. It's correct. Next method. अब next method क्या है? Next method है assumed mean method. इसमें हम क्या करते हैं ना, we assume some mean. Instead of finding the mean, we would definitely finding the exact mean, but initially we assume some approximate mean. Mean देखो हमेशा middle value होती है ना, so we say कि यहाँ का मतलब अगर 10 to 50 में observations है, so इसका mean 30 के आसपास होना चाहिए, right? So you'd say the first step is to choose one among the xi's, the one among the xi's as the assumed mean. तो जितने भी xi's है ना, उनमें से एक अज्यूम मीन, जैसे एक्सरसाइज प्रीवियस में मिड पॉइंट्स थे, सो उनमें से एक किसी भी एक को मीन मान लिया, यू जस्ट अज्यूम्ड इट फॉर नाउ दैट इट इज आवर फाइनल मीन, बट we know that we can't simply assume, so there is a way to do this. So we would say this is one of the method, assumed mean methods, wherein you the first step you assume the mean. Okay, the next step is to find the difference between the assumed mean, and each of the xi's, which is your deviation. You call that as deviation. So your deviation of each observation with the mean, so which means your xi minus assumed mean, where a is your the mean which you have assumed. With every midpoint you have to find the difference, that is the deviation of a from each of the xi's, correct? Then the third step is to find the product of the deviation with the corresponding fi. So the third step is to find di fi ka sum, that is summation fi di, and then you have to find the final mean or the actual mean using this formula, that is a plus summation fi di upon summation fi. अब इसमें a क्या है? A is your assumed mean, right? A is your assumed mean. What is your di? Di is the deviation, which is xi minus a, then fi is definitely the frequency, correct? So here now we need to let's say we are solving this question. The following table gives information about the marks obtained by 110 students, right? Marks obtained by 110 students in an examination. Find the mean marks of students using the assumed mean method. We have to find the mean marks of the students using the assumed mean. So assumed mean तो हम कहेंगे कुछ ना कुछ mean assume कर लो, right? So and what is the total number of observations? Obviously it is 110, the total number of observations, which means your summation fi is 100, right? The next thing is we would first step assume some mean. So here we are assuming the mean as 25. assumed mean is our 25 here. Okay. Why are we saying 25? Because see, if you observe the data start हो रही है 0 से और end हो रही है 50 पर. The final data is between 0 and 50, so it's good to assume 25 as the assumed mean, because it's the actual in between the lowermost class interval and the highermost or the uppermost class interval. Okay. Now we have the assumed mean as 25, so we would say the first step which we have done is a is equal to 25. Okay, assume mean is your 25. Then what was the next step? The next step was to calculate deviations, right? Next step was calculate deviations with the assume mean xi minus a. So हर एक का midpoint क्या होगा यहाँ पर? For 0 to 10 the midpoint will be 5, right? And for this it would be 15. This would be 25, 35 and 45, correct? So this is how you would first find the class marks after assuming some mean. So we said the class marks are 5, 15, 25. Now we assume the A as our 25 already. Next step is to calculate deviations. So deviations would be just xi minus A, xi minus 25, xi minus 25 and all of that. Multiply that deviations with the frequencies which were given. So fi di. Then you would say the summation fi di we are getting as minus 10. And now using this formula we get x bar is equal to 25 plus summation fi di is minus 10 and summation fi is 110, which is just given in the question only, right? So after solving this we are getting the mean marks as 24.9. So if you see that हमारा assumed mean और actual answer में बहुत close interval है, मतलब there is hardly any difference. So sometimes if your judgment call is very good, this can help you in your entrance exams, in your MCQs, but it's not always necessary, because यहाँ पर frequency distribution भी moderate था. ऐसा नहीं था कि 0 to 10 में hardly there were 1 or 2 students or something like that. So that was fine, but in here uh, this will not work in every sum, that your final answer will be it's so close that is just a 0.1 difference between your assumed mean and your final answer. This might not happen every time. Okay, but this is one of the methods to calculate mean again. So direct method we have seen assumed mean method, wherein we say the assume पहले एक mean assume करेंगे, we find then the deviations about the class mark, that is xi minus that assumed mean. Di is xi minus a. This is the second step. Multiply this di with fi. Di with fi. So which means you just need to multiply both of these and take the sum of this column, that is summation of fi di, because this is needed in the formula for assumed mean, right? अब मीन का फॉर्मूला वही है, देखो हमेशा जो होता है ना, समेशन ऑफ एफ आई एक्स आई अपॉन समेशन ऑफ एफ आई, बट यहाँ पर एक्स आई की जगह पर वी हैव यूज डी आई, राइट? वी हैव यूज डी आई. व्हाट वाज डी आई? डी आई वर डेविएशंस जिनमें से हमने हर बार assumed mean subtract किया था. Every time we had subtracted a from these deviations. So in the end, after calculating the mean, we need to add that assumed mean, na? Because now this mean is with the deviations. So to get the final answer with the real data, you need to add that assumed mean. That is the true understanding of this formula. I hope this is clear. Now we should move to next method of calculation of mean, that is step deviation method, right? So now this is also very simple and very much similar to your assumed mean method itself. So you would say here the first step is to choose here the first step is to choose assumed mean, right, and denote it by a, like we did in assumed mean method. Now here the second step is to find deviations, but you have to divide each deviation by the class size, by h, by the class size. So here your ui is xi minus a divided by h. So this is your second step. Now हम assumed mean में we were just subtracting the assumed mean from each observation. Here you also have to divide by the step. Your h is your step. Now this step can be as per your choice, usually like the assumed mean, but usually we take it as the class size. But if some students wish to take h as any other random value, such that मगर मतलब observations अगर हमारे आ रहे हैं, even after subtracting the assumed mean, we are getting the observations as 1000, 1200, 1500 and so on. So in that case you can reduce your observations by dividing them throughout by 100. So you can assume h has 100. So if you divide each observation by 100, your values get reduced, right? You get just 10, 12 and 15, right? But someone else could say I would prefer dividing them by maybe 300 or 150, or taking the LCM of all of this, right? So it completely depends on you, that whatever the step you are taking for division, right? Because answer will not change, and eventually in the formula, in the final formula for mean, you'll remember like when we studied this assumed mean, we said हम हर बार every observation में से we are subtracting a, from every observation we are subtracting a for the mean deviation, and in the end वाली formula we added that a, उसको हमने add किया, right? Similarly, here when you are subtracting, you need to add that a, but also you are dividing by the step here, right? So you need to multiply that step in the formula also, that h in your final result. So this is what step deviation method is about, right? So step deviation method is a plus h into summation fi ui upon summation fi, right? It's as simple as that. Now let's talk about a numerical based on this, right? So using step deviation method, you have to find the mean of the following distribution. So you have class intervals. Again, as I'm saying, these three methods which we are learning, that is which we have learned: direct method, step deviation method, and assumed mean method. All these three methods are applicable for grouped data, for grouped data. Ungrouped में तो problem ही नहीं है ना. Ungrouped में तो what do we say? It's just sum of all observations upon number of observations, right? So using step deviation method, you have to find the mean of following distribution. You would say 30 to 40 में your frequency is 10, which means between 30 to 40 there are 10 observations and so on. So the lowermost observation here is 30, the highermost is 90. So it would be wise to may assume the mean as maybe 60 or 65 here. So we are assuming a as 65, right? Because after finding the midpoints, we find that 65 is in between somewhat, and it has maximum number of frequency also. So it would be wise to go for 65. This is what it is. Then you would say after finding class mark, and you need to basically find the step deviation, right? So you decided that the step deviation can be 10 here, because all the observations, now someone could also take the step deviation h, the step as 5, the step size as 5, right? So because यहाँ पर 35, 45, 55 सब कुछ दिख रहा है, so it could also happen that you might need to divide that by 5. It's up to you. It's not necessary कि h10 ही लेना है, a65 ही लेना है. It's not at all necessary. A means your assumed mean. You can take anything. You can assume your mean, your final answer as anything. It depends on you. Now if someone would have assumed the a as 60 na, he would have got answer much closer. You can see 59.6, but here we have assumed 65, so answer thoda dur hai. It doesn't matter, answer will be same eventually in both the cases, in your any of the assumptions. So a here is 65, h यहाँ पे 10 क्यों लिया हमने, 10 की जगह पे 5 भी ले सकते हैं, 7, 8, whatever, जिससे calculations easy हो, from which the calculations should be easy. So the first case is we said that frequency is 10, 16 and all of that, we calculated the class marks, that is XIs, right? After calculating XIs, we said now we need to calculate the deviations, that is after dividing them by the step size. So first we subtracted xi minus hi. This is d is nothing but your ui in the previous case, as I said. This is your ui. Ui is xi minus assumed mean divided by step size. You multiply this ui by your frequency ui into fi, right, for each column, right? मतलब ये -3 actually में कैसे आया है? This -3 is basically calculated by xi, that is 35, minus assumed mean, which is 65, divided by 10, which is your step size. So this is your minus 30 divided by 10, which is just -3, right? Similarly, you can do it for -2, -1, and all of that. Now, class marks, so we already have discussed many times. ये कैसे आया? Midpoint of the class interval, lowermost interval plus uppermost interval divided by 2. So 30 plus 40 divided by 2, right? 30 plus 40 divided by 2. अब कुछ बच्चे स्मार्ट होते हैं, सर 30 और 40 के बीच में हमें क्लियरली दिख रहा है 35 ही होगा, तो ये प्लस और डिवाइड बाय 2 करने की जरूरत है क्या? सो नो, डेफिनेटली यू डोंट नीड टू शो दिस कैलकुलेशन क्लास मार्क का, यू कैन डायरेक्टली राइट दिस एज आल्सो इन द टेबल. नेक्स्ट, we said after multiplying ui and fi we get the column. So this is your, this 27 is summation of ui into fi, summation of ui into fi, and this is just summation fi. So again we would just use the formula for step deviation now. So we said step deviation में हम multiply भी करेंगे because we have divided. So we need to first multiply by our step size, right, h, and we need to add the assumed mean in the end. This is the difference, right? So first, if you analyze direct method mein, we were directly using summation fi xi upon summation fi, ठीक है? The second method, that is in the assumed mean method, we said क्योंकि हम assume करके subtract कर रहे हैं ना, eventually हमें वो assume mean formula में add करना पड़ेगा. There was no talk about h, but there was talk about a. So for every time we said you need to, in the final answer, you need to add that assumed mean because you are calculating the deviations as xi minus a, right? Deviations as xi minus a you are calculating. So this is what we said. Now in the last thing, in the step deviation, you said you are also subtracting the assumed mean, you are also dividing by the step size. So you need to multiply by the step size and add the assumed mean, right? अब सब बोलोगे कि सर आपने ये 3 मेथड्स क्यों पढ़ा है, जबकि हम ग्रुप फ्रीक्वेंसी के लिए या ग्रुप फ्रीक्वेंसी डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन के लिए we can simply use any of the methods, we can simply even use direct method. Now I agree with you all, but in some cases where the direct method involves intense calculations, in that case like the entries are big, so यहाँ पे 30 to 40 है, अगर 30,000 to 40,000 होता, right? So direct method के लिए you need to multiply xi into fi. So 35,000 पहले midpoint होता, into fi let's say कोई खराब नंबर है 27 28, तो कैलकुलेशन मतलब बिग कैलकुलेशंस हो जाएंगे, राइट? इसीलिए to divide that by the step size will reduce your calculations, will reduce your big numbers to छोटे numbers, to small numbers, right? So summation fi xi upon summation fi ही use कर रहे हैं, but calculation simplify करने के लिए हर observation को step size से divide किया और assume mean subtract किया, और eventually end result में step size से multiply किया और assume mean add कर दिया. This is how this method works. So why do we use this? Sometimes in the group data, when the numbers are big enough that the calculations become intense big numbers, so to reduce those big numbers to small numbers, we use these kinds of methods, that is the assumed mean method and the step deviation method. And also in board exams you might be asked to do the calculation by a particular method only. So that is why it is also important to study these methods, right? So I hope you all understood all these three methods to calculate mean. Till then, keep smiling like this smiley and stay safe, and enjoy. Hope you all are having fun with Ask IITians, and the next class maybe we would be studying many more interesting things, and that would be lecture number 3 of statistics. Till then, take care. Thank you.